Okay, Epstein, I also wanted to ask you about specifically your video about teachers pay teachers, because that interests me because I know lately there's been kind of there's like the Common Core controversy,
Mm.
and generally it seems like, libertarians don't matter in the big fights, and conservatives hate Common Core, and liberals, are always defending the Department of Education, and like they want their federal education standards. It seems like. So,
Some conservatives like Common Core, but anyway, sorry. Go ahead, finish your question.
oh no, just like and you also profile this teacher who's made a lot of money on teachers pay teachers. So can you summarize it briefly and also just speak to
Well,
why?
it's interesting you bring up Common Core because actually Common Core, I didn't get into this at all. Although a commenter noted that a lot of the curriculums that I featured in the video were Common Core related, and indeed, Common Core came out, and there wasn't. It was all of a sudden, and Common Core is sort of a guideline standards, official federal standards that a lot of states have signed on to. I don't know much about it, but I believe it has to do with, they've been enticed through in various ways. But teachers suddenly had these Common Core standards imposed on them, and they didn't have lesson plans that fit the Common Core. So teachers pay teachers really provided a way for them quickly to get it together and to, share amongst themselves classroom material that fit the Common Core. I mean, the Common Core, you have more conservatives like Saul Stern at the Manhattan Institute, who I believe is a fan of Common Core, and you have conservatives who just see it as, from sort of a federalist standpoint, don't like the idea of the federal government imposing standards. I tend to fall more in the later category, but either way, this site is really cool because it lets teachers sell their classroom materials to each other for small amounts of money. You have a lot of people that have made a ton of money. There's one outlier whose name is Deanna Jump, who's a kindergarten teacher in Macon, Georgia, who's made $2 million. And
A kindergarten teacher, that's even better. God, that's funny.
and she's, I've looked at her. I mean, I'm not an expert, but it seems as if this site has identified, a real talent who never would have risen to the top if it weren't for these online marketplaces. She's really good. She's a great teacher. She's super creative, and because of that, she's emerged. She got rewarded financially and publicly for her talents, and it's something you see in online journalism as well. You have a lot of people that couldn't have gotten an internship at the New York Times back in the day who become these big media stars, and that's because their stuff is great and they do great work. And I think it sort of speaks to this. There's just so much going on with that story in terms of how teachers are sort of the fact that they make decisions that in the U.S. we don't have a national curriculum. Teachers do have a lot of discretion, and so there's a wonderful side to that. There's a lousy side to that. The lousy side is that new teachers often don't get the support, and there's a lot of burnout in the profession because when school ends, they have to spend all night generating all their classroom materials. The nice thing is, though, that teachers actually get a lot of discretion in terms of what they teach in their classrooms. Common Core, obviously, to some degree, works against that. But teachers pay teachers sort of says, the authors of the material should be other teachers, and teachers are going to decide what the best stuff is, and that's going to rise to the top on this website, and we're going to reward each other. And we're going to, there's in an industry with lockstep pay where talent is not rewarded. You're paid based on the number of years you've survived. It's just kind of this wonderful force in education. And again, it's something that you don't have to be Actually, I would venture to say that most people that celebrate teachers pay teachers and are involved with teachers pay teachers. I know the woman who I interviewed in the piece, Amy Berner, who I've known since I was 10, actually, because she's friends with my sister. She's definitely not a libertarian, but it doesn't matter because, again, speaking to what you asked me earlier, it's like, how could you not love this idea? The fact that whatever your politics are.
I guess I want to ask also about. I was going to ask about if you have like a general optimism about, you know, both sharing economy stuff and general libertarian freedom stuff. Like, do you see sharing economy going forward? Do you know, are 3D printers and the internet and smartphones going to make us all free from the horrible government? Like, what's your optimism level on all this, I guess?
Yeah, I'm a kind of in the Jeffrey Tucker camp. I'm like,
Nice.
it's a little like I'm definitely a technological optimist, and it's partially because I just think we've seen in many industries where, even in healthcare, I mean, there could be no, education and healthcare, but I would even put maybe healthcare before education as an industry that the government has just corrupted and distorted in such severe ways that make all of our lives worse all the time. And yet, when you see things like, quick finger pick blood tests that maybe you can get at a pharmacy that will replace having to go to the doctor, and it only costs $5. So who cares about your insurance coverage? In the past, I've covered something called direct primary care, which are primary care doctors just opting out of the government-run healthcare system and saying, just pay me in cash because this is not working. I think that ultimately these government systems kind of collapse onto themselves, and that technology just keeps providing a way out. And I don't think that the government planners can keep up. So that's why I'm optimistic. 3D printing. I did do a piece on 3D printing. Naomi Brockwell and I covered this convention, and I mean, like, I'm just super excited. About the idea that you can make anything at home, and how that changes our economy, and how it makes it difficult to control what people make and do, and so forth.
I don't want to kill that general optimism, but since we have a tiny bit more time, you've covered a ton of urban city issue stuff. That was also kind of my dad's bag for a while there, fighting eminent domain and what have you. And you also live in New York City. And it always seems like the biggest, New York City and San Francisco, of course, are just these bastions of liberal nanny statism and, let's say, soft tyranny. What interests you about cities, and I guess the contradictions that are there?
Well, I tend to be interested not as much in the kind of the nanny state, or the kind of liberal politics, and why they're so common in places like New York or San Francisco or whatnot. But infrastructure issues, zoning issues, housing issues, because I think, one thing as a libertarian, I mean, cities are a little bit challenging because we're kind of living on top of each other. So what kind of rules are we going to impose on each other? Is like, I'm a little bit agnostic about zone. Should we have a society with no zoning where you can build a factory in the middle of the street? Can property rights and contracts among free individuals solve enough of the problems when we're living on top of each other? And also, cities are, despite the politics that come out of New York, the culture here supersedes that. It is the freest place to live, really, despite what the city council, despite how important the mayor and the city council think they are. Ultimately, government is less important. So I think that's really kind of what draws me in.
Okay. And
also one other thing on urban policy. I mean, you see the history of cities in the last 50 years is a powerful and visual example of failed government policies in terms of slum clearance, government-controlled housing, centralized school systems. Cities that were just even in the 50s, you can blame the automobiles and the interstate highway system, but I think it's so much more than that. It's the public policies that were imposed on cities, literally, that tore them apart, and sort of the folly of bad ideas, and central planners. and that history really interests me, you know, in a place like New York, and sort of why I'm interested in why New York, in particular, has made such a stunning comeback in the last 20 years or so.
Sounds good. I guess to wrap it up, first, tell me what you might be working on next, and also tell the good people where they can read your stuff and watch your stuff, I guess, most of the time.
Well, yeah, you can read most of my stuff just on Reason.com, you know, I write and I do videos, and it's all on Reason.com if you just type in my name. In terms of my next project, I've got a few projects going. Maybe the one I'm most excited about, and I've been working on this a little bit for a while. I put it on hold so I could file a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests because it was tough to get information, is affordable housing policy, which has become a bigger deal here in New York with the election of Bill de Blasio because it's one of his big issues. The city is getting increasingly unaffordable, and he wants more quote-unquote affordable housing, which is government subsidized housing where developers get tax breaks, tax credits, other sweeteners to set aside pieces of their, either build entirely affordable developments or set aside part of their market rate developments. My project, what I'm setting out to do, is to put an actual value on what we're spending on affordable housing because it's so buried. I think if people understood I mean, one example that I'm going to focus on is a $100 million building in the South Bronx that houses 220 people. I mean, do the math. That's almost all government money, and this was celebrated. I wrote about this in an op-ed I had in the Daily News. This was celebrated by HUD Secretary Sean Donovan as a model for what affordable housing should be.
God.
And I think it's a real scandal. So I want to put a dollar figure on it and argue, you know, take a page from Milton Friedman. If you want to help people, give them the money. Those people, not all of whom are poor, who live in this project Villa Verde, you know, if you took the share of what their unit cost and said, what might you do? Well, maybe instead they'd choose to move to Peoria and buy a mansion because they could afford it. I mean, you know, stop.
Oh yeah.
If you want to help, you know, basically, I think there's definitely a role for programs that help people find housing, particularly poor people find housing. But except if you're talking about people who are mentally disabled in terms of supportive housing, which I think is very necessary, you should just pretty much give them the money and let them figure out how they want to spend it.
You know, that's I guess that would make the purists angry, but I'm a purist who understands that that's way better than the government's actual plan. So I think that's okay. Yeah. We'll let you stay in libertarianism, even though you said that. I think that about wraps it up today. Epstein, thank you very much for talking to me today.
Thank you for having me, Lucy. Anytime.
Sure. Yeah, let me know when you do something else interesting, and maybe we'll talk again.
Great. Send me the link.
All right.
Okay, bye.